What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today I decided I was going to forge something that was a bit of a challenge for myself. I've been making tools for a couple of years now, and in my previous video, I made this chisel. Now, the leftover piece of 4140 that I had from making this chisel is not long enough to forge a chisel of this length. As such, I've decided that I'm going to try to make a handled chisel in much the same way that I made there, but I'm going to punch a hole and fit a handle into this chisel so that I can use the chisel, once it's complete, to chisel into a piece of steel with a bit of a standoff distance from the hot piece of steel to my hand. So let's get rocking and see how this turns out. So the first thing I'm going to do is just flatten out one end of this just slightly. In order to punch the hole for the actual handle to go through. And then I'm just going to put a real blunt taper on the what is going to be the struck end of this chisel before I punch that hole and get started with the rest of the project here. All right, so now that I've got that established, next step I'm going to do is bring this back to the face of the anvil and start punching the hole about here. And I'm just gonna eyeball it. And that looked a little bit off center to me. I'm just gonna try to make that line up a little bit better. All right, I'm dousing the tip of this punch in water every couple of strikes. And I'm gonna rotate, I know I started it off center, but I'm gonna rotate this. Rotate this every time I quench or every couple of strikes here at the beginning, just to eliminate most of the variation in how I hold my hand. If I'm punching at an angle, ideally, once I've spun that around, if I'm punching at the same angle, it'll eventually correct that hole all the way through so that there's not as much variation here. As you can see during that heat, the tip of my punch here started to get stuck a little bit. So in the future, I've got a little box just off camera full of kind of ground up forge scale. I'm going to be pinching just a little bit of that in there in the hole before I stick the punch in, and that should give me just enough kind of variation in the bottom of that hole, so to speak, that it'll actually allow the release of my my punch. Now, as you can see here, there's a bit of variation between this side of the hole and that side of the hole. I know for sure that that was partially caused by the slot being punched off center further toward this side than it was to that side. I don't think there's much I can really do to fix it at this point. The only thing I'm going to have to do now is when I drift this hole, I'm going to have to focus pretty heavily on this side so that it's about the same thickness or width as this side. Whew. Real hot. That ought to be all the way through. Okay, I'm starting to see it. I keep punching this just a little bit more. Now you can see there's this kind of shiny spot right here toward the center, and that is the imprint of the punch that I need to back punch through. Doing this with a slot punch I find to be always a bit challenging. The reason I'm doing this so cold is because I'm trying to shear that plug out as opposed to forge it in. The only reason that that plug has not come out yet is because that hole is so bent. Let's see if we can get it out of there. There we go. Not the cleanest hole I've ever punched for sure. Got a lot of bulging on that side. A little bit of a concern about the amount of material that I've got right at the corner of that hole. But in the grand scheme of things, it is driftable, and I just need to make sure that I cool this side of the hole as I start to drift it, so it pushes further out this direction on this side and kind of evens that hole out. All right, so it is nice and hot, and I am going to be dumb and drop my tongs too early. That down here. I'm gonna take this and pour some water through the eye on the side that it is skinnier on, which is this side. And that's going to cool that down so that it spreads more as I drift this on the side that was hotter, so that it hopefully spreads that back out to more toward the center. Now notice I am not trying to cool this off. The more heat that you keep in a drift, the more heat will stay in the piece and the better spread of that hole you can get just by using one heat. So I'm going to do that again. I'm going to cool off that side again, and then try to get this spread out so that it's a little more even, a little closer to center. And you can see that's a significant difference in size just from the previous time that I drifted, or from the punch, just the punch hole for that matter. But what I'm going to do next is to simply flip this over and drift from the opposite side. I'm going to continue to cool this side just a little bit more. And looks like I got it a little bit out of alignment with the chisel body. And hopefully once I start forging the cheeks of this, that'll kind of all even out. The handle is not going to be the end-all be-all of how this chisel functions, so in the grand scheme of things, I'm not super concerned. Yeah, I would say this is definitely about 5 degrees out of square with the actual line of the chisel or the body of the chisel. And that's fine in the grand scheme of things. Like I said, the chisel handle itself is not going to be the end-all be-all of how this chisel actually functions. So I think this is evened out well enough. I'm going to go ahead and do one more drifting heat where both sides are hot now. I'm going to start working on spreading the cheeks here just by coming back in with my my cross-peen hammer and forging on the actual sides of the hole here with the drift on the inside. I'm not really trying to widen this hole as much as set up for spreading the cheeks of the chisel here. And the goal here is to simply start flattening out the cheeks of the chisel and hammering those down using the flat face of the hammer at first, and then I'll try to get a little extra spreading on them using the cross peen to try to spread that direction, so it gives a little bit more shape to that area of the chisel, a little bit more style. And the key, just like you would be working on a hammer, of spreading these without too much deformation here, is to forge at an angle such that you're not collapsing the eye. You should be forging on the larger side of the taper of the drift primarily, so that you're not collapsing the eye into the taper of the drift, which makes it a lot harder to get off and malforms the actual eye of the drift, or of the tool itself. Woo. And this is definitely a good time to mention, if you're using a drift of any kind, even one this long, you should probably be wearing a glove on your non-hammer hand, strictly because this gets very hot. Like, this is already warm up here in the handle area. As I mentioned previous, you do not want to cool the drift down because it keeps the heat in the piece as long as possible as you're hammering and doing things that change the way the eye is shaped. I think I'm making all right progress at straightening this thing out to align with the eye itself, just by laying the one cheek that I'm trying to move everything toward on the anvil, and while this portion is still hot, just using the cross peen to kind of pinpoint the force to shift everything just that direction a little bit. So now I've had to go through some mental gymnastics to figure out how to do this, but I want this to be at an angle and hopefully not ruin this, such that when I hold this like this, I want to hold the handle over here, and I want that to be vertical, right? So I've turned it on a 45 to the opposite direction, or the opposite, like 90 degrees off from the direction I want to be vertical, and flattened that just slightly so that I control the amount of spread. I want this to be vertical in this direction, which is why I've hammered down on that vertical side, so that when I hammer down on this side, it doesn't spread a ton and I actually control it like I do with my slot punch and or the chisel video that I posted last week. And then the next heat, I'm gonna come in, forge down on this side so that it spreads the whole chisel out and becomes the actual chisel tip itself. Thankfully, turned out correct. So I want the handle sticking off at an angle so that I'm not in line with the actual chisel while I'm holding it. And I can hold it at an angle and rock back and forth as I walk it along a piece. All right, so this has turned into a really interesting shape to try to control. But I'm forging at interesting angles, just trying to keep everything in line and control the spread of that tip a little bit more. And then we're going to go back to that 45. I'm really liking the way this is turning out. It looks really goofy to an extent, but it'll be probably offset not quite, I don't know, 20, maybe 20 degrees as opposed to the 45 I was going for, but I think it'll be enough that it'll keep my hand away from anything hot. But now I'm just gonna go through and do some planishing, clean up the surface, and I think I'll be clean up the surface, and then I'll be ready to let this cool down and get to grinding. Alrighty, so I was getting through the editing process and found that I had not even gotten to the portion where I got the handle on, and I was already over an hour in. So I'm going to split this into two parts in order to not make the video just too long to consume, and we will pick it up in part 2 to finish out this project. So that is going to do it for today's video. If you enjoyed this part of the video, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, or ring that notification bell. If you are interested in seeing both parts of the video smashed together and posted as a feature-length video, please let me know in the comments section. Otherwise, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video. Or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rocking.